On September 30th, 1955, a Porsche 550 Spider lay shattered by the roadside at an intersection near Celebs, California. The clock stopped in the late afternoon. Those present did not see a famous actor. They saw a body trapped in twisted metal, motionless, not yet fully recognized for who it was. A few hours later, the name James Dean began to appear in the news. At that time, he was only 24 years old. Not long before that moment, everything had just begun to come into focus. East of Eden had just been released, and a face, still unsettled yet impossible to look away from, was starting to be mentioned. Rebel Without a Cause had not yet premiered. Giant was still in the process of being completed. There was no long journey behind him to explain where he had come from, nor enough time ahead to know what he would become. And everything had only just taken shape, not yet arranged into a structure that could be held on to. What followed did not unfold in the usual way. There were no additional roles to refine the image, no period of repetition to solidify a position. What remained stopped exactly at the point where it had become clearest. A state unfinished, unstable, undefined. And precisely because there was no continuation, it was never altered. It did not end in the conventional sense, but was held in place, intact, in the middle of a movement that had not yet been completed. That ending did not lie within a prolonged sequence of events, but instead concentrated into a single, specific afternoon, when everything was still moving in an expanding direction. In 1955, as his roles had just begun to shape a clearer position in cinema, James Dean did not confine the rhythm of his life to film sets. He moved between projects and racetracks, not separating those two worlds as opposing parts. Palm Springs, Bakersfield, he drove himself, entered speed directly, accepted risk firsthand. This was no longer a peripheral pastime, but something that operated with the same level of seriousness as his primary work. There, every deviation did not pass through any buffer before becoming consequence. On September 30th, 1955, he drove his Porsche 550 Spider on the way to a race in Salinas. That afternoon at around 6 p.m., and at the intersection of Highway 466 and 41 near Celebs, a Ford coming from the opposite direction made a left turn across the road. The turn opened directly into his path, at a distance too short to brake or redirect. The collision occurred almost head-on, at high speed, sending the Porsche off the road. The passenger was thrown clear while he remained trapped inside the car with severe injuries to the neck and body. The entire event unfolded so quickly that it left no space for any correction. He was taken to Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital and was pronounced dead upon arrival. The official report recorded a broken neck along with multiple internal injuries, while the other driver survived with minor wounds. The investigation did not proceed in a criminal direction, but stopped at a traffic collision at an intersection with no element of intent. Everything was documented, categorized, and closed according to procedure. But the way it ended did not correspond to the direction it had just been opening toward. A movement that was expanding was cut off without transition. The news did not spread immediately in an explosive way, but once confirmed, it quickly covered media channels across the United States. By early October, his name appeared continuously in news reports, attached to an image still very new to the public. Scenes from East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause were replayed in an entirely different context. No longer promotion, but a way to hold on to what had just disappeared. Image and person began to overlap in a way that had not occurred before. On October 8, 1955, the funeral was held in Fairmount, Indiana, where he had grown up. The casket was closed due to the severity of his injuries, maintaining a distance even in his final appearance. About 600 people attended inside the church. while thousands stood along the funeral route outside. The space was not ostentatious, but it could not be considered small. His presence within a very short span of time had exceeded its original scale, and his death was no longer contained as an isolated event. After the funeral, obituaries appeared in major newspapers across the United States, but there was no single unified way of describing him. Some emphasized a talent in formation, some stopped at a life ended too early, others placed him within the image of a generation in transition. There was not enough material to close a career in the usual way. What was written was not a conclusion, but more like the first attempts to name something not yet complete, and that incompleteness made any definition unstable. In the weeks that followed, a phenomenon began to take shape. Screenings of Rebel Without a Cause and later Giant drew larger audiences than expected. What people came for was no longer just the films, but a person who had disappeared too quickly. Audiences did not only watch the characters, but tried to recognize him within each scene. What had previously still been able to change no longer moved. It was held in place like traces no longer capable of being revised. The story did not end at that intersection. The car he had been driving did not disappear with the accident, but continued to exist as an extension of the event. Its parts were dismantled, sold, moved across different places. From there, stories began to emerge, without a single verified source, yet repeated along the same lines. Accidents, malfunctions, disappearances, then reappearances elsewhere. There was no official conclusion, but neither was there a way to make them fully disappear. Not long before that trip, James Dean appeared in a short film about traffic safety, speaking about speed and risk on public roads. It was not a role, nor was it performative. He spoke as someone who understood clearly the difference between control and loss of control. The distance between those words and the accident was measured only in days. Now, this detail adds another layer of meaning to his death. Not because he did not understand the risk, but because understanding it did not mean stepping away from it. To understand why everything ended the way it did, it is necessary to go backward, not to find a single cause, but to see how smaller things accumulated step by step from very early on. James Byron Dean was born on February 8, 1931, in Marion, Indiana, the only child in his family. His father worked as a dental technician, a stable profession with a clear path. His mother, meanwhile, brought into his childhood a different space, intimate, refined, and deeply influential. In his early years, when the family moved to California, the bond between mother and son was often described as something rare. She was the only person who truly understood him, and also the place where he found a sense of acceptance without needing to explain himself. In 1938, when James Dean was just 9 years old, his mother died of cancer. There was no single moment large enough to mark that ending. Only a disappearance that happened and then remained. Quietly, but absolutely. The one person who made him feel understood was gone, and from that point on, no one could replace that position. Soon after, he was sent back to Indiana to live with his aunt and uncle, not as a choice, but as a forced shift, from a place once closely tied to emotion to an environment that operated by order, stable yet distant. What he carried with him was not a clear memory, but a prolonged absence, something that could not be named yet, was always present. He did not forget, but there was no way to preserve it in a complete form. From then on, the way he existed began to change, not through expression, but through holding things inside. Emotions did not disappear, they were simply no longer spoken. And from this point of loss, a part of him never developed along a complete linear path, but always carried a void that could not be filled. After moving to Fairmount, Indiana, James Dean grew up in an environment entirely different from his early years in California. Life on the farm moved at a steady rhythm. Seasons, manual labor, days that repeated with almost no variation. His family followed Quaker beliefs, a value system that emphasized discipline, restraint, and an inward spiritual life. Nothing there created obvious conflict, but it also did not open much space for direct emotional expression. He lived within that stability, but did not fully merge into it. Gradually, another way of existing took shape. He spoke less, observed more. Not because he lacked feeling, but because he could not find a way to bring those feelings outward. What happened inside did not disappear. It accumulated, turning into a particular kind of attention toward people, gestures, and very small changes that others often overlooked. That silence was not emptiness, but a state in which something was always happening, though not expressed in the usual way. During his teenage years, he participated in sports, basketball, baseball, activities that required clear presence and quick reactions. At the same time, he appeared in speech contests and began approaching the stage through school performances. These appearances were not always stable. At times, he was in control. At others, he drifted away from what was expected. Yet that very instability created a different kind of impression. Others could perform correctly while he did it in his own way. Imperfect, but difficult to look away from. At school, he was not the type of teenager who could remain fixed in a single position. At times, he stood out through sports. At others, he separated himself from the crowd as if he did not truly belong to any group. And those who knew him during this period often spoke of two sides coexisting. A boy who could draw attention very quickly, and someone who would almost immediately withdraw afterward. That shift did not unfold as a dramatic event, but revealed itself through presence, sometimes very close, sometimes very distant. This oscillation did not disappear later. It simply moved into other spaces where it was given different names: presence, instability, charisma, or risk. In 1949, he graduated from high school and returned to California. Initially, he attended Santa Monica College with a pre-law direction, a choice aligned with the desire for stability. But that path did not last. He transferred to UCLA and changed his major to theater. This decision did not come from a clear plan, but from a deviation. Between a path that could be predicted and one without a defined structure, he chose the latter. And from that point on, his trajectory began to move away from anything that could be controlled. His early years in California did not open with a memorable role, but with a brief appearance on television. In 1950, James Dean appeared in a Pepsi commercial. There was no character to build, no story to retain, just an image passing across the screen and disappearing like hundreds of other faces. And the industry at that time operated by very clear standards: training, discipline, repeatability. He had none of those elements. In 1951, he entered film with very small roles in Fixed Bayonets and Sailor Beware. Short scenes, not enough to leave an impression, not enough to place his name into any position within the production system. Outside the set, he worked in the CBS parking lot, a job unrelated to acting, yet it placed him in a particular position, each day watching others walk in, take on their roles, leave, repeat. A cycle he stood right beside, but could not yet enter. This slowdown did not come from a lack of opportunity, but from not fitting the way the industry functioned. Small roles did not lead to larger ones. Auditions did not create confidence. No director could determine what type of actor he was, and no system was flexible enough to absorb a form of expression that was not yet stable. What was noted was not technique, but a lack of control. In 1952, he left California for New York. This decision was not an expansion, but more like leaving a structure that did not accept him. There, he joined the Actors Studio, a place that gathered actors experimenting with a new approach: method acting, under the guidance of Lee Strasberg. This method did not demand surface precision, but went deep into inner experience, searching for real emotion in every action. During one session, and when he was directly criticized by Strasberg, he walked out of the room. There was no prolonged argument, no explanation. A reaction that happened on the spot, revealing the distance between how he approached acting and how the system sought to control it. He remained at the Actors Studio, continued to observe, continued to participate, but no longer placed himself within formal systems of evaluation. At this point, his career had no achievements that could be measured by awards or box office, no leading roles, no long-term contracts, no studio backing. Yet what was forming did not lie in immediate results. A way of acting was gradually becoming clear. Not repetitive, not stable, not separated from personal emotion. It created a different kind of presence, difficult to measure, difficult to control, but impossible to replace when it appeared at the right moment. New York did not bring immediate fame, but it placed James Dean in an environment where acting was no longer bound by cinematic framing or the rigid production structures of Hollywood. On early 1950s television, he appeared in programs such as Studio One and Lux Video Theater. These were not roles large enough to establish a name, but they became the place where he began to experiment with a different approach. Not repeating, not fixed. Each appearance a new variation. In the environment of live television, where everything unfolded with almost no opportunity for correction, this style of acting both created attraction and caused instability. Directors could not precisely predict what he would do in each scene. Co-actors could not fully rely on the rehearsed rhythm. Yet that very offbeat quality created a rare sense of immediacy, a form of presence not prepared to become correct, but retained because it was real. In 1953, he stepped onto the Broadway stage with See the Jaguar. This should have been the moment to establish his position in professional theater, but the play closed almost immediately after opening, not because of a lack of ability, but because of incompatibility. Broadway required stability, a performance rhythm that could be repeated precisely night after night, a structure that could be controlled. What he brought operated in the opposite direction: constant change, reacting to emotion in the moment, not preserving the shape of the role. Placed within a system that required consistency, that style became a deviation. This failure did not create a clear step backward, but it exposed a limit. He could not exist within structures that demanded perfect repetition. It did not remove him from the stage, but forced him to find another space where change would not be treated as error. In 1954, he returned to the stage with The Immoralist. This time, his role, a provocative character psychologically complex, allowed him to use the very energy that had previously been considered difficult to control. No longer forced into a stable performance mold, he moved within the role through small shifts, glances, pauses, an approach that did not repeat itself. The response from critics began to shift. They no longer saw him as an undisciplined actor, but as a different kind of case, difficult to define, yet impossible to ignore. This was the first time his presence was recognized as an advantage rather than a problem. There were no major awards, no box office figures to measure, but there was a clear transition from an undefined name to someone beginning to be mentioned. It was from this role that he drew the attention of Elia Kazan. In the search for East of Eden, Kazan did not follow the familiar choices from the studio system, but stopped at a case without a clear position in film. He did not try to make James Dean more suitable for the role, but preserved the instability that was already there. What had previously been seen as difficult to control was not removed, but retained as part of the character. This choice did not pass through a conventional chain of validation. It occurred more like a recognition than a confirmation. At that time, James Dean was not a safe option. He did not have a strong film resume, no box office record to guarantee success, nor did he bring the sense of stability that the system usually required for a central role. But in working sessions, the way he held rhythm within a scene, shifting, drifting, then returning, created a different kind of presence. Kazan did not try to smooth it out. He adjusted the camera to keep up with it. The decision to cast Dean, therefore, was not built on what had been proven, but on something still in the process of forming. And that is precisely what made the choice inherently risky from the beginning. The role of Cal Trask in East of Eden came in 1954, when James Dean still didn't have a clear position in film. There was no sequence of roles to support it, no system behind him to ensure it. Now, what was placed into the role was not a finished result, but a state preserved from before the camera even began to roll. The character was not constructed from the outside in, but emerged from the way he existed within the scene. And for that reason, from the very beginning, Cal Trask did not operate like a conventional role. During filming, nothing held the same shape from one take to the next. He did not perform a scene in the same way twice. Each take carried a slight variation, sometimes drifting away from the original direction. The camera no longer recorded a prepared action, but followed a reaction as it unfolded. The rhythm of the scene was not maintained by the script, but by the director adjusting to keep up with what he was doing in that moment. In the scene where Cal offers money to his father and is rejected, the original direction ended with him leaving the frame. When the camera rolled, he moved forward, embracing his father in a complete emotional breakdown. The co-actor's reaction was not pre-arranged, but it was not cut. The shot was kept as it happened. There was no attempt to smooth or refine it. Our movement that deviated from the script became the point where the entire character appeared most clearly. When the film was released in 1955, attention focused on this performance almost immediately. Early screenings drew industry figures, not only to watch a new film, but to see a style of acting that had no clear precedent within the studio system at that time. The film achieved significant commercial success beyond initial expectations, and at the same time brought his name into an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, announced after his death, becoming the first case of its kind in that category. All of that unfolded within a very short period of time, when he was still there to witness the reactions of audiences and critics. East of Eden was the only film released while he was alive. There was no subsequent phase to expand or adjust. What appeared in this film was preserved exactly as it was. At the moment, it had just become most clearly defined. But that recognition did not stabilize him. As attention began to form, the way he worked did not move into a clearer order, but continued to maintain the same uncontrollable state that had existed before. He did not sustain a fixed style of acting, did not repeat what had been accepted, and did not keep himself within the production structure operating around him. Even earlier, at the actor's studio, he had left a session after being criticized by Lee Strasberg, and did not return, in the way a typical student would. On the Broadway stage, See the Jaguar ended almost immediately after opening, failing to create a foothold long enough to continue. Opportunities appeared, but were not always held long enough to develop into a stable direction. A pattern began to emerge more clearly as he entered film. He moved very quickly toward the center, but did not remain there. What had just been built was immediately subjected to an inward pull, not from circumstance, but from the way he existed within it. The attention forming around East of Eden had not yet stabilized when another image appeared, clearer, more direct. In Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean no longer moved around family conflict in a restrained way, but stepped directly into the instability of a generation growing up without a point of support. Jim Stark was not constructed as a complete figure. What appeared on screen was fragmentation, uncontrolled anger, prolonged silences, reactions that did not reach resolution. The way he held the character did not lie in clarifying its psychology, but in not completing it. Scenes of dialogue with his parents did not move toward reconciliation, but stopped at their most tense point. Movements through space, school hallways, parking lots, the Griffith Observatory, did not create a sense of stability, but always seemed slightly off-axis. And the camera followed closely, but could not close the distance between the character and the surrounding world. The rhythm of performance was not maintained through dialogue, but through pauses, sudden shifts in gaze, in posture, in the way he exited the frame. During filming, these elements were not always fully controlled. The working pace was intense, the shooting schedule compressed, scenes requiring high emotional intensity executed in rapid succession. He did not repeat the same state across takes, forcing the director to adjust the rhythm of scenes according to how he operated in each moment. This created technical inconsistency, but preserved a continuous flow of energy, unstable, yet consistent in a different way. When the film was released in 1955, the reaction did not remain confined to cinema. Global box office reached approximately $7 million, far exceeding Warner Brothers' initial expectations for a project centered on youth themes. But what spread faster than that figure was the way young audiences saw themselves in the character, not in the specific story, but in an unnamed state. The red jacket, the way he moved, the way he stood apart from the crowd, these details left the screen almost immediately. They no longer belonged to the film, but began to exist in life outside it. The film's key scenes did not function like conventional plot points. The Griffith Observatory, the chicken run, the suffocating family dialogues, each scene felt like a point of accumulation where nothing was resolved, only intensified. And the character did not move forward along a clear path. Jim Stark existed in a state of not knowing where to go next, unable to find a point of rest. James Dean did not complete the character, nor push it toward a conclusion. He held it at the point of incompletion, and that is what prevented the audience from standing outside to observe, instead pulling them inside that state. But as recognition became clearer, another limit also began to emerge. This image was not easily separated from the person who embodied it. The industry functioned on the ability to repeat success, and here, success was tightly bound to a very specific state. Rebellion, instability, non-conformity. These elements did not belong only to the character, but began to shape how he himself was perceived. The choices ahead, therefore, narrowed. To continue meant repetition, while stepping away carried another kind of risk. What unfolded in Rebel Without a Cause did not only expand his presence, but simultaneously imposed a limit on that very presence. The image was clear enough to be immediately recognizable, yet strong enough to resist change. And when audiences began to associate him with a specific state, the path forward was no longer about continuing along an established trajectory, but about finding a way to exist beyond it, if there had been time to do so. The image that had been recognized so clearly after Rebel Without a Cause was no longer a simple advantage. A subsequent role that repeated the same state would maintain safety, but would not open any additional space. The choice of Jet Rink in Giant emerged as a different direction. A character that did not begin from the center, did not carry an overt surface rebellion and did not stop at a fixed stage. During filming in 1955, James Dean entered a production structure far larger than anything he had previously experienced. The film spanned multiple decades, requiring the character to change over time, from a poor ranch hand to an oil owner, with an entirely different position and manner of presence. This forced him to do something that had not previously been explicitly required: to maintain a continuous line of the character while all external elements changed. Behind the scenes did not operate smoothly. The shooting schedule was extended, the working rhythm intense, and the differences in approach between him and director George Stevens became evident in each scene. Stevens constructed each frame with high precision, tightly controlling every detail. Dean maintained his habit of variation in each take, not preserving the established rhythm. These frictions did not escalate into open conflict, but appeared continuously in how both sides handled the same scene. In the later segments of Jet Rink, when the character had aged and entered an entirely different space, he did not attempt to complete the transformation through makeup alone. His posture, speech rhythm, and the way he held his body within the frame shifted toward greater instability, at times deviating from the familiar conventions of aging performance. The banquet speech scene, performed while not entirely sober, forced post-production to rework the audio. What remained on screen was not a polished performance, but a movement not fully controlled, retaining the fragmentation of the character itself. When Giant was released in 1956, the scale of the film and its cast positioned it as one of the major works of the year. High box office, wide reach, and its length and structure placed the film in a different category from the two previous works. Within this entire framework, his performance was no longer a single point of surprise, but became an extended line of development. From a beginning that was almost unnoticed to a state that could no longer maintain stability. Critics continued to acknowledge this performance with a second Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, also announced after his death. 2 nominations came from 2 consecutive roles, with no interval in between to adjust or consolidate. This created a case that did not repeat. An actor who had never gone through the usual cycle of a career, and yet had been recognized at the highest level in 2 consecutive instances. What Giant left behind was not only its scale or commercial success, but an effort to move away from the image that had already been established. A character that did not remain fixed in a single state, an approach that did not hold steady across phases, a process left unfinished just as everything had begun to expand. And by the time the film appeared, that entire process had already been closed beforehand, preserved exactly at the point where it had not yet stabilized. When the filming of Giant came to a close, the next choices had already begun to take shape, no longer centered on affirming presence, but on expanding it. James Dean was planned for the role of Rocky Graciano in Somebody Up There Likes Me, a character based on a real person, moving through violence, mistakes, and recovery. This was a type of role that required a different structure, not only maintaining an emotional state, but building a clear developmental arc over time, with changes that could be traced from beginning to end. At the same time, another project with Nicholas Ray was being prepared, continuing their collaboration after Rebel Without a Cause. This direction did not repeat an already established image, but sought to place him in a different space, where acting no longer revolved around direct emotional outbursts, but needed to be sustained within a longer structure with more subtle layers of change. Both of these choices indicated a phase that was opening, from roles defined by state to characters with clearer trajectories, from impulsive reactions to a deeper internal control. It was not a sudden shift, but a natural continuation of what had already been forming, when his previous mode of presence began to require a wider space to continue developing. These projects did not stop because of failure or a change in direction. They stopped because there was no longer time to begin. No scenes were filmed, no images recorded, yet they remained as part of a trajectory that had already been set, a direction that had not yet occurred, lying just beyond the point where everything had begun to expand. What did not happen did not end with work alone. It extended into the way he existed beyond what was seen. No private family was formed. James Dean never married, had no children, no stable structure to return to after working days. His personal life did not develop through accumulation, but stopped at relationships that never reached completion. Among them, Pier Angeli was not just a name, but a rare period in which he paused long enough to believe that connection could hold its shape. And they met when neither had yet been fixed into a public image, and therefore what unfolded between them did not carry a performative quality. Afternoons away from the rhythm of Hollywood created a space where he did not need to maintain any role. Within that space, the way James Dean existed changed. His reactions were no longer fragmented as on set, nor did they maintain the familiar unpredictability. He slowed down, became less guarded, as if testing whether something could be held without needing to be performed. At the same time, external pressures began to tighten. Pier Angeli's family opposed the relationship, not only because of religious differences, but also because of the way he existed. Unstable outside the norms they accepted. The studio system did not stand apart either, as a relationship not yet defined was not something that could be placed into a clear image structure. In later meetings, there was no single moment large enough to be called a turning point. But the rhythm of the relationship began to shift. What existed between them remained, but did not transform into a form solid enough to hold under pressure from multiple sides. It did not reach a clear promise, nor become a structure capable of sustaining itself. The closeness did not disappear, but did not hold its stability long enough. For Dean, this was one of the very few times he came close to a form of attachment that did not need to be hidden. And for that reason, when it slipped away, what remained was not simply the end of a relationship. What followed did not unfold through a decisive moment. There was no specific point to mark where everything ended. What existed between them stopped while still forming, not yet able to transition into a shape that could be retained. When Pier Angeli announced her marriage to someone else, it happened quickly, almost without leaving any buffer. There was no public dialogue, nor any complete version of events preserved. And that very pace made the break not remain at the moment it occurred, but continue to extend in a more difficult-to-name way. After that, what unfolded in his personal life no longer retained the state that had existed during that brief period. The closeness once reached did not repeat. Not because opportunities were absent, but because something had been missed at the moment it needed to be held. In New York, and he had a relationship with Liz Sheridan, one that unfolded in a space with less pressure, yet still did not maintain a stable form. After that came Barbara Glenn, longer lasting, but following the same trajectory: approach, connection, then separation without a clear point of closure. The relationships did not stand alone, but reflected the same pattern of operation. The relationships in James Dean's personal life did not remain in a form long enough to become clearly defined. They began with closeness, extended for a certain period, then shifted rhythm through very small changes. There were times he left earlier than expected, meetings that did not return for a second time. There was no single event to indicate an ending. Distance appeared gradually, inserting itself between encounters. At a certain point, the relationship still existed, but its original form could no longer be sustained. After his death, what belonged to his private life began to be retold in multiple directions. Friends, Acquaintances and biographers pieced together fragments of memory, each holding a part. Some relationships with women were described relatively clearly. Some connections with men were recounted through recollection. Certain details were reconsidered in terms of accuracy when viewed from a distance in time. Debates surrounding James DeWeird made the picture more complex. There was no continuous chain of evidence sufficient to close the entire story. What can be clearly established lies instead in the space he left behind. James Dean never made a public statement about his sexual identity. There was no direct statement sufficient for a definitive conclusion. Relationships existed in parallel, but did not come together into a single definition. What remains does not lie in which label he belonged to. It lies in the way he entered and left before anything had time to stabilize. And that space becomes what endures longer than any explanation. There is no clear ending point to close the story of James Dean, because what he left behind does not operate in the way a complete career usually does. 3 films, a short span of time, insufficient to create a system of roles that can be compared or categorized. Yet that very lack preserves a rare state, one not adjusted through stages, not repeated to the point of becoming familiar. The images he left do not remain confined within cinema, but slip beyond it, entering the way audiences see themselves. Without needing a complete explanation, viewers still recognize something familiar within it. In the years following his death, Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant were not simply revisited as films. They became a way of holding on to the presence of a person who had stopped too early, and when everything had not yet had time to stabilize. Audiences were not watching an actor in development, but returning to an image that had halted at a very specific state. Small details, the way he stood, his gaze, the distance he kept from others, were repeated across generations without needing adjustment to fit a particular time. It is precisely that lack of change that keeps them from becoming outdated. That influence did not remain within cinema. It extended into the way people dressed, moved, and how a generation understood rebellion and isolation. Not as a designed trend, but as a natural response to an image real enough to believe. His trace does not lie in being directly referenced, but in continuing to appear in other forms, without needing to be named. And over time, it is precisely that lack of definition that makes it harder to replace. A career that ended at the age of 24 does not leave much to compare. But it preserves something rare, not extended, not adjusted, not made familiar through repetition. There is no continuation to clarify it further, nor an ending to close it in the usual way. What remains stops exactly at the point where it had just become most clearly defined, and for that reason it does not move forward. But it does not disappear either.